Hey everyone, Matt Thomas here. Thanks for watching. So I wanted to do a video on behavioral psychology hacks that will help with teaching. So a lot of what we do, we give off a lot of micro expressions, right? And so people will pick up on that, right? It's not just what we say, but it's how we say it or how we act. And I will tell you, a lot of these come from the business world as well, right? Treating clients well, getting them to support your ideas, to buy into what you're doing, which is what we do as teachers, right? We want our students to buy into what we're doing. We want to give them the best opportunity for learning. We want them to be motivated and supportive of us as teachers, right? So that's what a lot of these are. So before I share these, let me give you some caveats. So I will tell you right away, some of these suggestions may not fit your personality. And I'm a big believer in not forcing something, right? Like use the things that will fit your personality first before trying to force something that just you don't really buy into, right? So take the ones that you go, yeah, I think I could do that. And the next one is try a few until they become effortless. Some you may have to force a little bit, right? And then after a while, it's just like, it's a habit, right? So you can start doing them more frequently without even thinking about it. And the next one is there are so many right ways to do things. So these are some suggestions, right? Mainly behavioral psychology, but there's so many other right ways to do this. And sometimes a positive can be just getting rid of a negative. So you're going to see one of the suggestions here is something that people may do in the classroom that's seen as a negative. If you just stop doing that, then that becomes a positive. So you're not adding anything to your teaching repertoire. You're actually taking something away, which can be seen as a positive. So that being said, let me get right to it. The first one I want to start with is give respect to get respect. Now, I will say, I've mentioned this many times in my other videos, so I won't spend too much time on it. But essentially, teenagers model adult behavior. And so if you model the respect, right, that you want to get, students will naturally start reciprocating it. Saying things like, please, thank you, asking for help rather than telling students to do something like, hey, Joey, turn the lights off. I'm going to show this, whatever. More so like, hey, Joey, do me a favor. Do you mind dropping the lights, please? Things like that. They'll model adult behavior. And as I mentioned in previous videos, it may take some students a little while because in their home life, they may have adults who don't treat them very well. So they're modeling that adult behavior. After a while, and it may take a little while for some students, they will know that they can trust you, that you give them a respect, so they're going to give it back to you. It's going to really help with classroom management. Essentially, speak to your students the way you want to be spoken to, and that's not just a general term. Model for them, good behavior, respectful behavior. I'm going to go into a lot of different ways to do that as the video goes on. Okay, so the next thing, I have to tell you, this to me is maybe one of the easiest things to implement, and one of the most powerful things, and I've got 3 articles there that'll support that. One of the most powerful things you can do to change the dynamic of the class. Smile when a student does something, and I'll explain what that something is. So this is a micro expression. Students, okay, when you smile at someone, it makes them feel good. Again, I've got the articles right here. You can read them. There are tons of articles about this. When you smile, it makes others feel rewarded. It makes people trust you. And that's so important in our classroom, right? We need our students to buy into what we're doing so they hopefully will do it, right? So when a student comes into class, a little smile like, hey, Joey, what's up? Good seeing you. If they're coming in during lunch to talk about something or during nutrition or before school, any reason, as soon as they walk in, you see them, give them that smile. Hey, what's up? Give them that smile. They love that. They love feeling appreciated. And again, it's a micro expression. They're picking up on these things. When a student raises a hand in class to respond to something, give them that smile as opposed to a generic like yes or what is it or what's your question? Like more of a yeah, Joey, what is it? Or Joey, what can I do for you? Or something like that, right? Give them that smile. Acknowledge them. So if you're like, hey, would someone mind responding like to this quick write or whatever the quick write is? Like, what do you think about this and this? Oh, Joey, thank you. Or, yeah, Joey, like give them that smile, that positive reinforcement. Other students will see that. It will create dopamine in students when they'll know that when they respond or when they raise their hand, you're going to give them that smile. Again, a lot of this is a subconscious thing. It's micro expressions. Smile when a student does something, when they give a great response, or honestly, a response, right? Hey, thank you so much for that. Give them a smile. Make them seem like they're the most important person in the world to you right then. It's huge, huge thing for students. So next one, it's okay to show vulnerability. it's okay to admit when a person's wrong. So if let's say as a teacher, you're like, hey guys, I'm so sorry. I wanted you to finish that in 2 days or 1 day, and I didn't feel like I gave you enough time. Let's take another day to do it. Or hey, do you mind? I'm going to extend the due date for another couple days. It seems like I didn't give you enough time to do that. That kind of thing. Sorry guys, I screwed up. Or hey, so I'm so sorry. I totally did the answer wrong on that, or I totally saw this wrong, or whatever. Admit when a mistake happens. It's okay to show that you're vulnerable. It also creates trust in a relationship. There's a couple articles there to read about that. Apologizing shows trust, creates strength and sympathy, and you don't need to give a speech about it. No need to be like, in my classroom, if you're wrong about something, just admit it. No, just lead by example. Your students will follow. Teenagers follow adult behavior. And I'll give you the best example. It was my second year teaching. I had a student who, I don't know what happened, right? One of the biggest rules in my class is don't talk when I'm talking. That's like the big rule. And he was talking when I was talking, and it was an 11th grade class. And I stopped lecturing, and I was like on. I'm like blah, 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 Joey, quit talking. You're not supposed to, whatever it was. It was my second year teaching, right? I'm still kind of learning all this stuff. And so I go back to lecturing, and first of all, he shut down. Like I could see in his eyes, he's like embarrassed because I, got mad at him or whatever. And so I started lecturing, and in my mind, I'm like, dude, you really screwed that up. Like, you were way too hard on him. I'm talking to him while I'm trying to lecture, whatever it was. So I stopped class, and I said, guys, I'm so sorry. I need to acknowledge something. And I turned and I said, Joey, I'm so sorry. I totally got on you, and there was no need for that. That was on me. I'm so sorry. I don't know why. I have no excuses. And I'll try not to let it happen again. Like hopefully you forgive me. I'm so sorry. And he looks at me. He was stunned. He goes, no, dude, we're cool. And I'm like, thank you. And then I went on to lecturing. That's all it was. And other students see that. And they see like, wow, that teacher apologized. Because, yeah, he did get on him a little too hard. And that was really cool. Again, it creates trust. And so it's okay to show that vulnerability. Next one. Take the time to acknowledge every answer. So when a student raises, this is to me a huge opportunity to making students feel comfortable in the classroom. If a teacher is asking a question, hey, what's the answer on number 4? And a student raises their hand, and the teacher's like, yes. And the student's like, 7. And the teacher's like, okay. And then goes on. I'm like, dude, that was the best opportunity to make a student feel good. So like, hey, what's the answer to number 7? And if students raise their hand, oh, Joey, thank you. And then Joey's like, oh, it's 7. I'm like, awesome, thank you so much. Boom, next. Students, that creates dopamine in the students. Students like that. It's an anticipation hormone. It makes them feel good. So they know that when they're raising their hand, they're feeling comfortable raising their hand because they know that they're going to get a positive response. If this is definitely one thing, if teachers sometimes have a classroom where students don't always raise their hand when the teacher asks for something, implementing this style can slowly but surely build that up. And then, after a while, like students will be raising their hand because they feel comfortable. They know there's not that fear of like, what if I get it wrong? Because what if they get the answer wrong and you're like, hey, I totally see where you got that from or something like that. Or like, oh, cool, thank you. Who else? They know when they get it wrong, right? They don't need to be called out. And a couple great articles there on the neuroscience behind why it's important to acknowledge every student who responds. Plus, as teachers, we've probably heard every answer there is, right, to a question, to whatever our questions are, or whatever. If we're doing a novel, like, hey, what was the characterization of blah, blah, blah? What was the influence that this character was, whatever. But to that student, we've heard all the answers. But to that student, that's the first time that student has actually ever said that answer. So for us, okay, thanks, that's the first time a student's ever said it. Like, I like to acknowledge it as such. It's like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Even though we've heard the answers many times, like, that's so awesome. I see where you're going with that. Thank you. Like, literally make the student feel good about responding. Other students will raise their hand to respond. So that's huge. Okay, next one. Don't randomly call on people. Now, back in the day, right, and it's used now too, for many years, like 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15, whatever, equity sticks were the big thing. They were doing tons of seminars on equity sticks and what's those flashcard things, like equity cards or something like that. And it was huge. Like, I think we were even told, like, it's a good thing to say, like, oh, I use equity sticks on my classroom so that every student talks. It sounds good theoretically. But according to neuroscience, it's not. Equity sticks are not the best thing to do because essentially, like, you're scaring them into paying attention, but they're not necessarily paying attention, right? So the amygdala shuts the brain down when it's hyperactive. And the amygdala essentially senses threat. And if a student does not feel comfortable being called on, and a teacher calls on them, boom, the amygdala is like, boom, on high alert. And when the amygdala is on high alert, new learning doesn't happen, right? It doesn't allow learning to pass through the amygdala affective filter, and they can't create that memory. So, and I've done other videos on this as well. You may be like, oh yeah, you said this in another video. Some students learn better by talking. The ones who are always raising their hand, that's how they learn. Some students learn better by hearing. So if you have students who are always raising their hand, sometimes teachers may go, you know what, you're always talking. Let me get someone else. They see it as a bad thing, and now that student is shut down. No more learning is going to happen by that student for today because now she's embarrassed or he's embarrassed. Now it'd be nice to have other people raise their hand, sure. But it's more of an indirect, allow them to feel comfortable, know that they will have confidence that if they do raise their hand, you're going to be nothing but supportive, right? So some students learn better by talking, some students learn better by hearing. Again, that's psychology and neuroscience. So by randomly talking, calling people out, when people get called on, their brain just shuts down. So there are those who do need to talk and those who don't necessarily need to talk. So a better thing would be politely ask for responses. Hey guys, does someone mind here, blah, blah, blah on this question? Oh, cool, Joey, thank you so much. And then, over acknowledge that first one, right? You'll start getting more responses. There are times when I'll ask a question and no one's raising their hand. And then I go, did I ask it wrong? And sometimes I'll show vulnerability. Guys, I'm so sorry. I don't think I asked it correctly. Let me say it another way. And then I'll ask politely, please, if someone doesn't mind. And there's nothing wrong with telling the students, guys, I'm so sorry. I do need someone to respond. Does someone mind, please? And all of a sudden, a hand starts to go up. You're like, oh, Joey, thank you so much. And then they give the response. You're like, oh, thank you. You're the best. Any others? And then all of a sudden, more students will start raising their hand because they're getting that acknowledgement. So again, equity sticks and equity cards are not supported by neuroscience and behavioral psychology. And again, it sounds good. Well, all of my students, I want them to speak. And they all want to be heard. Wanting to be heard and wanting to speak are two different things. So yes, people want to be acknowledged and want to be heard, and you can do that through writing. You can do that through speaking. That doesn't mean they all want to be forced to talk in front of others. So totally two separate things. So so don't randomly call on people. Great behavioral psychology hack. It'll make your classroom feel more comfortable for those students, right? For the ones who don't like to be called on. So next one, the way a teacher reacts establishes future behavior. Okay, I've talked about this in other slides, so I'll kind of go quickly with it. Acknowledging great answers. Telling students, like, I really like that. Or there's times like students will say things that I've never heard. And I'm like, dude, that's amazing. I got to tell you, I've never heard that before. Can we give Joey a round of applause? And then blah, 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 blah. And then they give a round of applauses. And again, as a teacher, we don't have to pretend that we've heard everything, right? Like, I've never heard that before. That's so cool. So react positively to students, what they say, and then you're creating that future behavior, right? Praise your students. Students will love that. Here's a great article just reinforcing that, how the way you act towards someone's response will encourage future participation. I'll tell you real quick, I have a student, and he doesn't do much in class. He doesn't. And what I would do, like, there'd be times when he's taking an assignment, I'll be like, you know what? Hey, Gerardo, thanks for doing that assignment. I really appreciate you doing that. I know that's tough. I really do appreciate it. And he's like, thank you. Like, he'll do that sometimes. He took a test the other day, and I'm like, thanks for doing that test. I know it's not the most exciting. I really appreciate you putting that effort into it. And he goes, you're welcome. Like that's really cool, right? So I'm praising him and slowly starting to do his work in it. Anyway, so next one, acknowledge what you want, repeat it. Dopamine is generally considered the reward neurotransmitter. Again, it's not necessarily accurate, but it's more when students are anticipating something, right? But it does get released when you do something, when you acknowledge students. So by acknowledging, let's say someone picks up a piece of trash and you didn't ask him to, and you're like, Joey, thank you so much for picking that trash up. Oh, you're welcome. They get that dopamine. Now, whenever they see a piece of trash, they're gonna connect it with dopamine. They're gonna hopefully probably pick it up without you even asking, right? So you acknowledge what you want, repeat it. Hey guys, thank you so much for not talking while you were writing the essay. I know, like, writing an essay for 45 minutes can be challenging. I really appreciate you guys not talking when I asked you not to. Then they're like, okay, cool, yeah, no problem. Or, thank you guys so much for doing that test and doing as great as you, working so hard on it. I really do appreciate it. I know those aren't fun to sit through. You guys are awesome. Like, I really appreciate you doing that. Acknowledge that. So then the next time they'll be like, ooh, again, dopamine subconscious. Last time we sat there quietly and did the test. He told us how great we were. Let's do that again, right? That's the brain talking. So acknowledge the behavior that you want repeated. So the next one, phrase questions to get maximum response. So if you ask a lot of questions in your class and you're not getting the response you want, there's ways to ask the questions. So one way is called a presumptive question. It's when you're essentially presuming everybody has done it and you're letting them know it's okay to admit it. And the best thing is to show vulnerability for you. So I'll give you an example. I was doing an article with my class. It was an Avid article about ditching, it's a great article. It's a short article. Students really enjoy it, but I wanted to set up prior knowledge, and I wanted to do a presumptive question. And so I told them the story, like, hey guys, when I was in high school, my friend was the TA for the principal. So there'd be days that I couldn't do it, right? I just wasn't into school that day. And so my friend would get me out of class. As the TA, he'd just send me past and get me out of class. And so I'm telling a story, I'm connecting with my audience, I'm creating vulnerability and trust. And so then I asked, like, how many of you guys have ever ditched before? Or how many of you guys have also ditched before? In that realm, I gave my story, and then I raised my hand. How many of you guys have also ditched? So they know right now. Now, it took a second. People were like a couple, like, yeah, I ditched. And then all of a sudden, they saw how I reacted, and all of a sudden, more hands. I'm like, okay, cool, thank you. And then like almost all the hands went up. And so I'm asking presumptive questions, like I'm presuming they've all ditched. And so I told a story, and that got my class involved with that article. If you are phrasing questions a certain thing, so let's say how you respond. If someone is giving a response, and if you say it in a way that's like, why did you say that? That almost makes them sound stupid. Versus like, hey, how did you get to that answer? Like, I like the thought. How did you get to that answer? Right? Good way to phrase something, especially when maybe the answer is not the most accurate, right? And when after hearing responses, right, to get responses back, react with positive body language, like stick that arm out, like, oh, thank you so much for responding, etc. And when you're asking questions in class, ask the right questions for the answer that you want. Let me explain. I think a lot of teachers, myself included, for years will do this. They will ask a presumptive question, not a presumptive question, an implied question. They'll ask what's called an implied question. And so here's a perfect example. How many of you guys know the answer to number 4? And then all the hands go up. And you're like, Joey! And Joey puts his hand down. He's like, what? You asked me if I knew the answer to number 4. I know the answer to number 4. You didn't ask me to say the answer. And that's subconsciously what he's thinking. So next time the teacher's like, who knows the answer to number 7? No one's going to raise their hand. Because they know what that means is they have to speak out now. So as a teacher, if you ask them separately, hey, how many of you guys know the answer to number 4? Even if you can't explain it, how many of you know it? And all of a sudden hands go up and you're like, cool. Would someone mind explaining the answer to number 4? Does someone mind? Oh, thank you so much, Joey. So now asking the questions that you really want. Because asking them to say the answer is different than how many of you know the answer. So that's really important. Okay, next one. Here's the perfect example of if you take away a negative, it creates a positive. Limit sarcasm in class. So I have an article there. Sarcasm is effective if both people in the conversation have common ground. So let's say teachers are venting to each other about similar experiences. Then sarcasm is effective. If the people in your group do not share that common ground, sarcasm can be offensive. It can be seen as victimizing. It can kind of promote anger, and people don't trust you anymore. And there's a great article there if you want to read it there. So I would highly suggest limiting sarcasm in the classroom. Or if you use it, maybe the students are kind of like collectively sharing about an experience they weren't happy with, and maybe that's a time because they'll have common ground. But for a teacher who uses sarcasm consistently and then says, "Oh, my students love sarcasm," well, according to behavioral psychology, maybe a couple of them do. But the majority of them just kind of take it and they might look at you as negative, right? As a negative person. So maybe really limit the sarcasm in school, or not school. I mean, in class at certain times, right? Okay, last couple here. This one's so powerful, and this is one that I've had to work on, and I still have to work on. Listen and try not to interrupt. So here's my problem as a teacher. This is what I do sometimes. I try to anticipate what the student is going to ask. So a student comes up and is like, "Hey, Mr. Thomas, can I go ahead and then I'll interrupt and answer the question because I think I know what they're asking." And I'll be honest, oftentimes I'm wrong. And so the student goes, No, I was wondering about this. And I'd go, "I'm so sorry, I interrupted you. I'm so sorry, please." So listen, let the student say everything he or she's trying to say. Even if you can anticipate what they're asking, let them finish before you interrupt. And I have to tell this story really quickly about Dr. Tomasi. Oh my gosh, this is so great. So quite a few years ago, I had an idea of where I was going with my classes. The class I was teaching at the time, I had this idea, this vision, and I wanted to run it by her. And I was nervous, right? I was practicing my speech, and I had all these things I wanted to say, and I'm like, I got to get all this stuff in. Because as you know, like when you're trying to present something, oftentimes, the other party you're talking to can sometimes interrupt with their ideas. And I'm like, I got to get everything out. So I had the meeting with Dr. Tomasian. She sat down, I sat down, and I said, I have this idea for my class that I'm doing at the time. And I just started going. And she sat there and she listened. And she listened and she listened. And in my mind, I'm like, I better hurry up and say everything because I'm presuming she's going to interrupt me at some point to either share her thoughts or whatever, right? And she didn't interrupt at all. She listened to every single thing I said. And it's funny because as I'm saying it, I'm like acknowledging, like, dude, she's listening to everything. This is so cool. And I'm saying everything. And when I was done, she again paused and stopped because she didn't like jump in. She like made sure I was finished. And she thought for a second. And then I think her response was like, let's look into that. Or something along those lines. But what I was so impressed with was that she let me finish saying everything. And there was no interruption. There was no like waiting for me to take a breath so she could jump in with her thoughts. And that was the most incredible thing. So listen to your students when they're speaking or asking you a question. Try not to interrupt. And again, that's something I still am working hard for. And when we do, acknowledge it. Like, I'm so sorry I interrupted you, right? Shows vulnerability, builds trust. And so quick review. Give respect to get respect. Smile when a student walks in the door, says something, acknowledge them somehow. It's okay to show vulnerability as a teacher. Acknowledge every answer that's said. Don't randomly call on students. Praise your students for what they do. Acknowledge the behavior you want repeated in class. Phrase questions for maximum responses. Like if you want them to answer a question, ask for that. Hey, would someone mind explaining this? Versus just, how many of you, who knows what mitosis means? And then calling on a student because you just asked them who knows what it means. You didn't ask them to say it out. Limit the sarcasm in class and listen to your students and don't interrupt when they're asking questions. Thanks, guys.